Eve is a professor at UMASS Amherst Department of Earth, Geographic, and Climate Sciences. She is a political geographer and works at the interface of rivers and energy, focusing on politics and policy with the ultimate goals of supporting thriving ecosystems and human communities. She grew up in Cambridge, Mass., studied environmental biology in college, served in the Peace Corps, Honduras, and lived in Oregon for 17 years, working in environmental education, conservation, and teaching high school before going back to school for her PhD. She did her dissertation on the long-term history of the Columbia River management, and it was there that she learned that electric power, politics, economics, and institutions are often the drivers of river management. Thank you, Eve, for coming and talking to us tonight.
So thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you. I've heard about you all for years and how active and on top of everything you are. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about some of the things that I have to say, because my caveats are that I don't really know as much about the Deerfield as I feel like I should. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the Connecticut, and that's mainly what I'll be talking about today. But highly relevant stuff going on in Deerfield. And then also I should just tell you that this is sort of a summary of several different projects at the moment, that none of which are like totally finished. So just my caveats are, I'm interested in your feedback as I develop this work, but part of why I'm excited to talk to you, Eric invited me just a couple weeks ago, and the timing worked for me because I don't teach for another 2 weeks. So that was really handy. But also I'm going to be talking to you about like two very, very immediate issues that I would love to have you all provide some input on. So with that, I will start. So I'm going to be talking about pump storage hydro today, and I'm talking both about its effect on the river and its role in the energy grid, and how energy policy and markets that are constantly changing as we speak affect that interface. So that's the and I will be, the two big issues that I'll be talking about are, one, you guys probably all know the phrase the 401. So the water quality certificate that's happening on the relicensing of the First Light projects, Northfield and Turner's Falls. The draft 401 is due next week, and there will be 30 days to comment. So we'd love to have people comment on that. And then the second thing is that Senator Comerford is about to introduce a bill to slightly amend last year's climate bill in some ways that I think are incredibly important. So I'll be talking about why today. And the crucial phrase is to add the word not. So instead of saying provided that existing storage systems shall be eligible, which is what the current law says, that it should say existing storage systems shall not be eligible. So I'll get there. All right, this is my summary. I'm not going to read all this to you. I'll come back to it, but I'm going to have you kind of skim through this right now. So this is the good things and the caveats about pump storage in these two rivers. People in the back not see. Should I read?
I can make it out.
I'll just read the last line, which is the moral of the story is that the ISO markets do their job. Incentives outside the ISO markets are unnecessary, expensive, undermine cost optimization, and they can cause significant harm to these rivers. So we should avoid those. So these projects are licensed by FERC. But Massachusetts policy actions affect these plants, their rivers, and how much ratepayers, that's all of us, pay these companies. So I'm talking about Brookfield and First Light, Bear Swamp, and Northfield when I'm talking about these companies and these projects. These are just some of the ways, and I'll be talking about all of these at least a little bit today. 401 review of First Light's projects, the Massachusetts 2024 climate bill, And then there's two kind of renewable energy-like standards that have been developed in Massachusetts in the last few years, one called the Clean Energy Standard and one called the Clean Peak Standard. And I'll be talking about both of those as well. And on the moral of the story, this again is sort of the outline of everything I'll be covering today, is your comments and support are needed for two things. Asking for mitigation and data on Northfield Mountain in First Light's 401, and supporting Joe Comerford's 2025 Act defining clean energy. All right, so background, energy storage. Yes, energy storage is incredibly important. We need more of it. Why? So here's a graph that was put together in a report that was done just over a year ago by the state. And it's showing what's going to happen in 2050 in a really long cold snap in the winter. And what it's showing you is that at times, so where you see that really long peak, you might have a lot of solar or wind and you'd have a whole lot of excess clean energy, but you wouldn't be able to use it. And then you'd come up with another time where you see that dip and you'd have a very low supply while you still have really cold weather, and you wouldn't be able to meet it. And the only way you can do it without storage is by building out a huge amount of additional generation between now and then. And so the predictions are basically that right now we have a total peak demand of approximately 25 gigawatts, that's 25,000 megawatts. By 2050, it's going to be twice that, or even more, when we really meet our peak energy demands. And if we have enough storage, we can actually reduce the amount we need to build by about 20 gigawatts. So it's a huge difference in how much generation we need to build out if we've got enough storage to move that excess wind and solar across time by a few hours to a few days in a long cold snap. You guys following me on this? All right. So that's why energy storage is important. It's not because it substitutes for something, it's that it moves it in time. Yeah, this is what I just said. But all energy storage uses more energy than it produces. To charge a battery or to charge a pump storage plant, you actually use more energy than you produce when you release it. And it can have significant negative environmental impacts like pump storage does. So question is, how do we promote an energy transition that needs some energy storage while we protect the environment and also minimize costs to ratepayers? So that's sort of the nut I'm trying to work through. So what's the context of what's happening with storage these days? Storage is about to explode in terms of deployment. It's already starting in certain states like Texas and California. This is actually a 2-year-old graph, and I think it would look really different already. This is US-wide. So you can see that, and this is, I think, deployment. Yes, it's deployment as opposed to like plans, you know, which would be much bigger. But you can see that the higher bar on the right is about 4,000 megawatts. Well, think about Bear Swamp has well over 600 megawatts. And Northfield Mountain is about 1,200 megawatts, right? So if you think about it, the existing storage that we have just in pumped storage, even in New England, is about half as much as they're showing being deployed nationally in the last 10 years, right? So that leads to this little thing down here at the bottom that says nearly all operating storage are pumped hydro. So the new storage is not primarily pumped hydro, but the existing storage is almost all pumped hydro in the country. And here in New England, as you know, we have 2 large plants, and they are most of the storage we have, and they're very important for that reason. So here I'm just giving you the numbers. So how does this interact with the grid? So here's my little diagram of what happens at Northfield Mountain. What its goal in life is to do is to use surplus electricity from the grid to pump water up the mountain when there's excess supply and when prices are low. And I have an upside down lightning bolt to show that it's using electricity. And then you have a smaller lightning bolt going down when it's generating electricity to demonstrate that there's less being generated than you used. And it releases water back down through the mountain when there's excess demand and prices are high. And pumping requires about 35% more energy than Northfield Mountain can produce with the same water. So Northfield operates when high electricity prices in a day are about 35% or more higher than the low prices. And when that doesn't happen in a day, it's not going to operate that day. So some days it's going to operate, other days it's not. Some days it's going to operate a lot, other days it's not. That's how we actually want it to be. I'll talk about that in a minute. But when you get that big price differential, that's the market saying this is what we need you to do, and Northfield's going to respond. So just understanding more about ISO New England markets. So ISO New England, for those who don't know, is the independent system operator of New England. That's the manager of the entire electric grid of the entire region, and they also run the wholesale electric markets, which are now competitive markets ever since electric restructuring, which happened around the turn of the millennium. So this is the map of the whole regional grid. And what you're seeing on the upper right is a graph of the demand on a single day last year in March, which happened to be the day before I gave a similar presentation. So that's why I got that day. And you'll see the demand goes way down in the afternoon. So 00 on the left is midnight. And then 20 on the right, it was about hour 21. So what's that, 9 o'clock? When I downloaded this graph, so that's why it ends at 9 p.m. So you can see that around 14 o'clock, 2 p.m., right, demand was very, very low. So why would that be? Well, we'll get there in a sec, but ISO New England uses wholesale market prices that change every 5 minutes to incentivize and shape when generators operate and when they don't. So if you had to predict, when would you think that prices are going to be high and prices are going to be low during that day?
First thing in the morning and then middle afternoon to the late evening.
Yeah, so it's especially when it's ramping up. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, first thing in the morning.
Yeah. So those increases and those heights, those are going to be the times you're going to get higher prices. Does that make sense? All right. So why I asked you a minute ago was there such low demand in the afternoon? It's because this is a spring afternoon when there was a lot of sunshine. And so that solar energy is what's called behind the meter. So it's mostly happening in people's houses and it's actually not seen by the transmission grid. And so instead of being seen as generation, it's actually seen as lack of demand. So you get this low demand there. So here's the prices for that day. And you can see they didn't totally track when demand tracked. They did track a little bit more like that. The low price actually happened slightly after the lowest demand. But you can see it's pretty close, right? So if you're Northfield Mountain or Bear Swamp, you're gonna look at this differential and you're like, okay, is there a 35% difference between the low point and the high point? And if so, you're gonna wanna generate and pump that day. So you probably can't see the numbers, but the low number is a little below 20 and the high number is a little above 50. You've got more than a 35% difference. You want that plant to be operating that. So I went into the USGS gauge that happens to now exist within the Northfield pool or the Turner's Falls impoundment. It's something like 9 miles upstream, but you can still really see the trace of what Northfield is doing. So I've got the USGS gauge on the top, and the smoother line is the level of the water, and the spikier line is the velocity of the water. And so the level is going up because way downstream, 9 miles downstream, Northfield is dumping water into that impoundment, and it actually backs up all the way up 9 miles upriver, and you see the level go up. And what's one of the things that's really remarkable here is here, you've got this really down point in the velocity. Doesn't quite hit 0, but that velocity actually sometimes goes negative. There's so much water backing up from Northfield for 9 miles upriver that you get a negative velocity at the point of the gauge.
So that you mean the river is flowing upstream?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, all the way to Vernon Dam, it flows upstream at times. Yes. So here it doesn't quite, like I said, it doesn't quite reach zero, but it's getting close.
Why wouldn't it go downriver?
So,
What's the business?
so this entire picture that you're seeing is the impoundment. And so what's happening is Northfield is dumping more than the volume of the river itself through its outtake. And that just sends water in both directions in the impoundment. So it's going downstream in that direction and going upstream in that direction. And then actually when it pumps, it does the opposite. So it can go negative velocity from Turner's to the intake when it's pumping.
So when they release, you actually lose your gradient upriver.
You can. Yeah. Yeah. It depends. It partly depends what Vernon is doing as well. So, because Vernon is also dumping water, but yes, the what's it called, the downstream end of Vernon is, if it's empty, it's below that outtake. Yeah, so it can actually, you can actually have the reverse gradient. All right, so why is this a problem for the ecosystem? Well, the river goes up and down, the flow moves back and forth. According to electric price, it's not really great for living things. There's been complaints about erosion from that level switching ever since the project was built. And when it pumps, millions of small living organisms get sucked up and almost all of those die. So those are sort of the three major big picture problems ecologically with Northfield Mountain. So, key question before we go on when we want to think about money is, do these facilities make enough money to stay online even if they only generate some of the time? Because again, part of what I'm trying to say is the impacts are huge when they operate, but the benefits can also be huge. So one of the things you want to make sure they do is that they only operate when we really need them, right? And not when we don't. So if they only operate when they really need them, it's not, it turns out to be about 12% of the hours of the year. So we want them to stick around 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, because they're going to be an important part of the energy transition until all the rest of the storage gets built. Do they make enough money based on that 12% or so to stick around? Basic answer is yes. And this is an old slide from a previous presentation that was built from the relicensing documents. And it doesn't show net profit. I apologize, it'll be with revenue, but I will tell you the net profit was significantly positive, but it does show revenue. And what you are seeing here is that Northfield Mountain was making $160 million a year of net revenue. And that was in 2019. So I'm going to talk about all these different categories in a minute, but right now I just wanted to make that point that we are not talking about projects that are about to close tomorrow if we don't give them extra money.
What percentage of the time are they operating now?
About 12%.
Are they really? That's all they are operating?
Well, I forget if, honestly, I forget if it's 8% or 12%, but that's how often they're generating. But in addition, they have to pump, right? So for every 8 hours they generate, they're pumping for 12. So that would mean that if they're generating 12% of the time, they're operating 20%. Does that make sense? Oh no, the other way around. It would be 12. Sorry. No, maybe it's that. Maybe that's what it is. It's that they're operating 8% of the time, and then they're generating 8% of the time and operating 20% of the time, something like that. I might have the exact math, but it's one of those two, and the proportion is basically 50% more time to pump than they get to generate.
Now, do they only operate when they want to operate, or can they say, hey, we need power, you have to produce, and you're not going to be making that 35%?
ISO New England can dispatch Northfield. But most of the time when they do, it's because Northfield has bid into one auction or another. So how do I explain this? I don't have the slide, but another presentation I did a couple of years ago showed there was a time in one June when the water levels went crazy low. I don't know if anyone followed this, and boats couldn't even access Barton Cove. And they said that they were dispatched by ISO New England. My best guess is that they had actually bid into a new kind of market called a demand asset response. I forget what the last D is, DARD. And it basically means if you need me, I can actually add demand. I can add load. There aren't very many things in the New England grid that can just suck up a whole bunch of energy that is excess in the grid on command, and Northfield and Bear Swamp are two of them. And so my best guess was that they had bid into this DARD market, and based on that bid, ISO New England said, guess what, you're up, you got to do it now. And they sucked up a whole bunch of water, and that made the levels go way down. So they're dispatched, but they're dispatched after they're bidding into a market saying, we'll do that at a certain price.
I was kind of thinking, say one power plant goes down for some reason, not needing extra power.
Yeah.
Can they just force them to say, hey, you have to?
Yeah, but yes, they can, and they get compensated monetarily very handsomely.
Okay.
Yes. One of my great stories about Northfield, and I heard about this from the ISO New England, just to give you a great story. Do you all remember Snowtober?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we remember this.
All right. So it's Snowtober, if you remember, like a third of the branches in all of Western Mass went down, and so did all the power lines, right? So interior New England went dark. So what we call demand or load just all of a sudden went down. But most of the power generation plants in the region are on the coast, and they stayed on. So you suddenly had this moment where you had this complete excess supply on the grid. So what did IS New England do? They call up Northfield, turn on your pumps, full blast, every one of them. And they did. And that like stabilized the grid. Yeah. So these are plants that when they're needed, are really needed and really can perform important functions. All right. Is this gonna work?
Click the touch pad.
Did I do it wrong?
Oh, it's kind of-
Sorry.
Yeah. Great.
All right. So what I wanted to point out here in this slide now is that there's a whole bunch of different markets. So ISO New England has not just energy markets. They've got capacity markets, reserves markets, and regulation markets, and other kinds of markets they call ancillary markets. And these projects earn money on all of these depending on what they're doing. And the capacity market is the one that pays them just to stick around. Basically, you bid into the capacity market. You say, I promise 3 years from now, I'll be around. I'll bid into your energy markets every single day of that year. So if you are bidding into the capacity market in 24, you're committing to bid into the energy markets every single day of the year in 2027. You get paid to stay online. And you can see that in Northfield, in 2019, the capacity market, that's the brown part of that bar. So something like 2/3 to 3/4 of its income was coming from the capacity market, not from the energy market. So they are already getting compensated for sticking around over time. The other ones I wanted to just point out to you, the regulation and reserves are basically for fast response. That comes in really handy when there's just, something kind of unexpected. And then the rec markets, I'll talk about in a minute. That's the estate one. I'm going to give you an example from today. So today, if you ever look at the ISO New England homepage, you get something that looks like this. And the map over on the left changes color depending on how expensive energy is. And normally it's green. So I was kind of interested that it was yellow. That meant prices went up. And I just checked it a few minutes ago and it was orange. So prices are still up since then. Often prices are about $40, whatever the unit is. Megawatt, probably, yes. But last I checked, they were about 300. So, you know, cold weather and not, anyway. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on here. Oh, you can also, another interesting thing you can see is what resources are being used. And in the pie graph on the left, hydro is 4%. And net imports is 15%. Net imports is almost always hydro. So
That's hydro.
it's either Hydro-Quebec or New York. So about 20% of our grid, even in that moment, was coming from hydropower. We think of our grid as not very much hydropower, but it actually is pretty significantly hydropower. And so then I looked up, this is the detailed graphs of today, and the thing that really stood out to me, so let's just go through this. So on the upper left is demand. The middle left is the change in 5-minute prices. The lower left is what resources are getting used, and that top blue one is natural gas. That's the dominant source. The upper right is the day-ahead market, which changes hourly rather than every 5 minutes. And the middle right one was the one that really caught my attention. That's the reserves market. So we had a spike in the reserves market at around, I can't even tell you what number that is. It was around 6 a.m. So I pulled up the gauge data from the Northfield gauge, and I can't prove one caused the other, but there's definitely an increase in the gauge not very long after that reserve spike. So it's certainly possible that Northfield saw that spike and was like, oh, let's release some water because we can get some good money. And I just did a rough calculation. If they used half their capacity to meet that reserve spike for 15 minutes, they would have earned about $6,000 in 15 minutes. It's not that much for a plant that size, but not bad. All right, so the final kind of revenue I want to talk about is RECs, renewable energy credits. This is the one that comes from the state. Every state has a different rule about how they define them. Massachusetts RECs are a little bit more valuable because we are a little bit pickier about what we want. And one of the things that we don't allow is high impact hydro. So if hydro is going to get our RECs, it's got to be certified as low impact, and pump storage is not eligible. But yeah.
So the relationship between SRECs and RECs?
Yes. So solar RECs are a kind of REC, basically. But I'm not an expert on the solar RECs.
It's a
But yes.
kind of competing market then? Or is it?
No, it's a subset. Yeah, SRECs are a subset of RECs. Yeah. So Massachusetts created 2 new categories in 2019. So renewable energy credits, we're not going to include high impact hydro, and we're not going to include pump storage. But guess what? They invented something called clean energy credits. And this one includes high impact hydro. And it includes nuclear power, by the way. And some tens of millions of dollars go to these resources. And that's ratepayer dollars, that's Massachusetts electric customers paying for these resources, yeah?
Well, when you're talking about before the 12%, I mean, being at its peak, how much of that is really offset by solar and other energy sources?
I don't know the percentage, and that's an excellent question that I would like someone to answer, and I don't know anyone's figuring that out right now. But I do know that most of the time it's not. So most of the time, what these pump storage plants are doing is they're displacing more expensive gas with less expensive gas. And they're using more gas to do it, which means more greenhouse gas emissions, but lower cost for the grid.
I have solar. I haven't had a bill in 10 years. My system runs at 110% because I had 3 daughters that left my house 10 years ago. So, but I get a summary and it always says that my solar does offset hydropower. It actually helps decrease it. The use of my solar, as I generate energy for myself, and it actually even gives it for my region, where I live in Central Mass. It actually does state that what it does is you running solar can actually help offset, you know, the demand for hydropower.
They say the demand for hydropower, really? Is it, or they don't say no?
Well, it gives a whole list of what you're actually helping
Huh?
by running solar, but there's other ways of creating electricity, like wind turbine, which isn't a big percentage in the area where I am, but it says it actually saving like 4.5%.
Well, there's no doubt, right? Like that graph I showed earlier where there's enough solar going on the grid that demand actually looks really low. Like absolutely, solar is making a huge difference and so is wind. The wind is a minor difference so far, but it's coming, it's about to start.
And I even get an offset, the company in all the country that offsets, well, it bankrolls all solar is Sonova. Every quarter I get a check for about $410. That's been going on for the last 6 years. And because of what my system produces, some of it goes back to the grid, but I'm allowed almost 8% a year. So my highest peaks are December and January, that it automatically gives me a bank. I'll get a bill, but it's always offset by what's generated from that bank.
Yeah, that's great. So what you get from the bank is the SRECs. I have solar also, so I know this. So you're getting paid those SRECs when you get that quarterly check. And then when you're just getting a negative electric bill, it's because of the net metering that's happening. So I have a hard time believing that it's offsetting hydropower, but I would.
It tells you what my solar generate is actually helping, and it gives a list of it, and it says hydro.
Hydro's on the list. I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't give a percentage.
Yeah.
For, you know, what you're decreasing, but
I don't have an explanation for that. Then, I mean, it makes sense to me that solar is displacing gas, it's displacing oil, it's displacing other stuff. How it would displace hydro, I don't know.
But it would be the dams, because there are in Turner's, there's 2 electric generators running off the power canal. So it could be that, it's not it's actually the generating solar is during the day and at night, and you need, if it's excess, then it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe it's doing something different than what I'm thinking. I mean, in general, a regular dam that's not a hydro pump storage is going to have a certain amount of water and therefore a certain amount of electricity it can generate. And whether it does it in the afternoon or at night, it's still going to need to do it, you know, and we don't have giant dams with so much storage. I mean, 15 Miles Falls is as much in the Deerfield, right? There's a couple in the upper reaches that have quite a bit of storage, but most of our hydropower dams in New England don't have a huge amount of storage. So they pretty much have to, you know, run the water that comes down the river. And so you might be displacing the time of generation, but I don't think you'd be like preventing them from generating. Anyway, so that's what I'd love to see the document. Send me a picture. I'd be interested to see what it does.
Pumping the water back up the mountain, that's just like a recirculate, isn't it? For more energy.
Yeah.
The energy.
Well, it uses more energy to pump up than it generates when it's released down.
They're pumping it up for storage, or?
Yeah, they're pumping it up. So like when you're generating solar, they use the excess solar to send that water up to the top of the hill. And then when the sun sets, and now all of a sudden there's no solar and they need more energy, they release the water and then it produces electricity. So it's shifting the generation in time.
The hydro meter never runs backwards.
Should I keep going? All right, okay, so mass clean energy credits, added high impact hydro, and then mass clean peak credits, allowed new storage to operate certain hours of the day and season, for example, 4 to 8 p.m. in the summer. Any kind of storage that's generating for those 4 hours straight gets an extra amount of money that's paid by us. And Bear Swamp is one of those plants because it added an extra, I'm confused about whether it was 30 megawatts or 66 megawatts. Maybe you guys could.
About 60, 66, I
Okay.
think.
Anyway, I estimated based on the data that I got from the state that it probably earned about $800,000 from that in 2021. That's the most recent year for which there's information. So one question I had for you guys is whether you think you've seen change in Bear Swamp operations since the Clean Peak credit was started in 2019. Do you think hydro peaking, the pattern of when it happens, has changed at all?
I would say it may be more reliable. You know, if they say, and it seems to go up at like 9 o'clock, you know, and run to a certain amount. I can remember you never knew when the water was going to come up.
So how many years has it been more reliable like that, would you say?
Well, since the last license.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
And that's when the
Okay.
big change.
I'll go wrong with that, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah.
Under the current license, so things changed from the previous
Yeah.
license, and one of those requirements for Bear Swamp was to alert the public when they're coming up, because
Right.
even though there's a recreational flow schedule, if suddenly ISO calls and we're in a major heat wave, you will, if you look at the chart, you'll see it suddenly go up, but it hasn't reached down yet. That's when the usually when the pump storage starts, but it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sometimes it happens on our guaranteed low water weekend, our tournament. Where they dump on a weekend where they're not supposed to dump at all because they got the call.
Yeah, that happened last year.
Yeah.
We went up at 8 p.m.
On Friday.
We had to make sure everybody was off the rivers. And we didn't pick them up 10 miles down.
It's hard to distinguish between them running Pipe Brook Dam and Bear Swamp, right?
Right.
Right, it
The
is.
only way you can tell is if you're sitting on the dam,
And you're looking,
you'll see the reservoir go down, and the next day you see it back up. That's the only
Yeah.
time you can tell. I mean, can't tell what they're doing in the upper reservoir by pumping out by downstream.
Yeah. I'm gonna
See
wonder.
the fluctuation.
In the Five Brook Dam, it's only about 10 megawatts maximum. That's all they can generate. So it's not a big amount.
Yeah, so how much does the Charlemont gauge reflect what's happening at Bear Swamp?
What's happening at Bear Swamp or what's happening at Fife Brook?
At Bear Swamp, because I want to know what's happening at Bear Swamp.
Yeah, that's what,
Is there any way to figure it out?
Gauge that we know of,
Yeah,
nothing we can find online anyway. And all the other gauges for those other dams are, you know, it's USGS controlled.
right. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, that was my question, so I guess the answer is no. So, this is the most recent climate bill. Most of it is about siting, but there's a section on storage. So it says basically every distribution company, that means Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, shall enter into cost-effective long-term contracts for approximately 5,000 megawatts of energy storage systems not later than July 31st, 2030. So just to get your head around that quantity, right? That graph that we saw as of 2 years ago in the US had 5,000 total built in the entire country. And they want 5,000 built basically here in Massachusetts in the next 5 years. And they want us to pay for it, ratepayers to pay for it. And at the very end, it says existing energy storage systems shall be eligible to participate. So what existing storage systems are there? Well, the main ones are 2 big pump storage plants in the state that together have close to 2,000 megawatts. And if you think, well, we're going to get that 5,000 megawatts by getting 2,000 that already exist, and then we only need 3,000 more, it becomes a much more sort of imaginable number. So I've been trying to alert people to the fact that that notion that we include existing energy storage systems and that our utilities and therefore we as ratepayers should pay for them, it makes no sense. There's a second part of this bill that I got alarmed by, and that was a bill where they defined both small and large clean energy infrastructure to include all energy storage. Because this seemed to me to be potentially a backdoor to call pump storage clean energy. So my concerns were that procurements could pay large sums of Massachusetts ratepayer money to existing pump storage to do what it's already doing. It could expand the clean energy standard to have ratepayers pay for pumped hydro generation beyond the ISO New England markets. And it could incentivize more pumping and generating despite the increased cost and despite the increased greenhouse gas emissions and despite the negative environmental impact on rivers. So how large might these sums be that could cost ratepayers money to pay for existing storage? Well, New York has figured out the cost of their recently enacted procurements, and they predict them to cost about $351 million per gigawatt. So I just did the math. And it comes out to about $6.5 million we could potentially be paying to Brookfield and First Light over the next 15 years to do what they're already doing. Now, it's not clear that this is how this is going to be done, but it seemed clear to me that this should not even be allowed. So why might this be in this bill? Well, as you all probably know from our wonderful Measure 1 recently, the Massachusetts legislature is not the most transparent. But I did what research I could, and I found that at least in 2023, Brookfield was actively lobbying and telling the legislature that they definitely should include new and existing energy storage in their procurement bill. And then I looked at the lobbying amount of money that was being spent by First Light and Brookfield, and you know, it's 200,000 in 2021 from First Light, less than that the other years from the other companies, but significant. So Joe Comerford is a very brave and wonderful Western Mass legislator, and she has prepared a bill she is going to introduce next week. And it will say that small clean energy storage facilities shall add the following words, provided that they shall not include pump storage hydro. Same for large. And then the phrase where it says, provided, however, that existing energy storage system shall add the following word, not. So this bill is being introduced next week to modify that climate bill, and it would really, you know, basically end the highest risk, I think, from these provisions. So that's the end of my stuff about that bill. Do you guys have any questions about that bill?
What are the chances of that passing?
Their office said it will be a heavy lift, and we will need people all over the state. So that is partly why when Eric invited me to talk, I thought, you know what, I'm going to tell you guys about this and see if you might be willing.
Bill in the House?
What was that?
Is there a companion bill in the House?
Certainly not yet. I mean, this hasn't even been introduced yet.
It's part of a whole climate bill.
No, the climate bill passed in November. This is an amendment to the climate bill that is being introduced next week.
I mean, don't they take into consideration how they're like pushing heat pumps on people and then their bills are already gonna go up?
Yes,
Doesn't seem like it.
but I mean, let's see, how do I say this? So my impression is that DOER, the Department of Environmental Resources, is really on top of this stuff. They really have been thinking about a lot of this stuff. But the legislative leaders have been basically sweet talked, that's my impression, by the companies that have convinced them that energy storage is important, which is true, and that therefore more energy storage is better, which is not true. But talking to DOER, it seems that they know these problems.
Oh, yeah.
But they have a legislative law in their, their books now that says you got to get 5,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030. And you're going to do it through competitive requests for proposals.
Yeah.
It seems to me very likely that they will end up feeling like they have no choice but to have a certain amount of existing storage be part of that, especially if the language is still in the bill that it shall.
Could you just change it to 3,000?
We talked about building more storage facilities to reach the 5,000.
Yeah, so what New York did is they said, we want 6,000, we already have 2,300, so therefore we need 37. Like something like that would make sense to me. We want 5,000, we already have almost 2,000, let's get 3,000. But that's not what the bill says. So yeah, you could ask for a bill that would make even more changes to the climate bill, but when I talked to Senator Comerford's office, they were like, you know what, the fewest wording changes we can make as possible is going to be the most likely to make it through.
Are we actually proposing to build new infrastructure? And
Yes.
in what form will be the storage facilities?
It's mostly at the moment going to be lithium battery.
Right. So they're doing oil.
What alternative storages are there?
So the main kind is lithium battery, and basically what I've been hearing is like there are companies that make lithium batteries, and the companies that are bidding to build it don't actually make the batteries. They just put them in big truck trailers, and they find the land to do it, and they connect them to the grid, and that's what it
Be a
battery
bunch of tariffs on
installations.
all that.
What was that?
I said now there'll be a bunch of tariffs and all that.
Well,
Aren't some of the local communities passing bylaws prohibiting these storage?
Yes, well, there was that big controversy locally. Where was that one?
Shutesbury.
It wasn't the storage one, was it?
Yeah.
It was like in Ware or something.
Well, we voted to oppose any kind of storage.
Okay,
And that would then shut down hundreds of acres of solar.
yeah, I thought Shutesbury was storage a little bit.
Just to be clear, nobody's proposing building home storage facilities.
No, and in fact, pumped storage is very difficult to build. You need water next to a mountain, right? You don't get that very often. So yeah, no, there's no.
So I understand that Northfield was applying to increase the size of the reservoir. Would that be, that they would be receive payments for that?
The way I've wondered about that, like the Clean Peak Standard, they gave Bear Swamp extra payments because it built new generation. The way the Clean Peak Standard is written right now, it would not do it for Northfield because it's based on additional generation capacity, megawatts. It's like a bigger turbine, and a bigger reservoir does not increase the size of your turbine, but that could change.
They dredged their facility 50,000 compared to 7 a few years ago. Stores. The project manager. They had significant problems. It got shut down for years.
It was like 6 months it was off.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm just gonna very briefly tell you about relicensing. It sounds like many of you are up on this, but relicensing has been going on the First Light plan since 2012.
Yeah.
We might finish it this year. There's a fish flows and fish passage settlement. It has some really good things for turners. But there's a bunch of remaining concerns at Northfield, and one of them is that hydropeaking is likely to get worse, and that's not incorporated into the studies. People are beginning to speak out, and we expect a draft 401 next week also, along with the introduction of this bill next week, and we'd love to have you and all of your networks active in both of these issues. Gosh, I sound like such an activist instead of a professor, but I've been advising people on these things, so I've become one. Anyway. All right, I'm done.
Thank you.
Question on storage. On these large windmill installations that they're proposing for around Nantucket off coast, aren't there storage facilities along with those that would, you know, easily get 3,000 megawatts?
No,
No, they're not.
no, I mean, the largest storage facility that I've heard of is the one that's supposed to go in Everett, and it's 750 megawatts.
Okay.
So that's yeah, in Everett where what's the plant that's about to close there? Yeah, maybe. There's some big fossil fuel plant that's gonna close there. Yeah, so they're planning on putting a big battery installation there.
An old waste sub. As if it's where I'm thinking.
No.
No?
I thought it was a generation, but yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And it's a waste sub.
So anyway, they're trying to build batteries that are gonna pair with wind, but they're not going, they're sort of independent projects that are trying to talk to each other.
Well, what about another form of alternative energy? And the name is escaping me.
Nuclear?
No, Smith College, Mount Holyoke.
Geothermal.
Geothermal.
That's not
Now,
really clean.
I know Columbia Gas used to be a client of mine, and when they decided to go with the cogeneration system at their physical plant, it was all natural gas, and of course Columbia thought that, that they could easily be able to build another plant. But political pendulum swung and they weren't able to do it. And Smith College was taking up all the gas off of they call it the Northampton lateral. It comes up from Ludlow, the gas pipeline. They're going to be getting off completely with geothermal, and I would have to think that would take a lot of, places like that. If they have the money, they can do it. It's going to take a lot of demand off of the grid.
No,
So I'm not,
they generated more than they used. So they were an exporter of electricity to the grid. So it's actually gonna cost more, just like at Amherst College. We couldn't export to the grid, so we reached a certain point, the turbine would back down automatically and maintain what our export was set at. So actually, in Smith College is not gonna be completely off, because they will be burning gas. But they're not gonna be generating any electricity.
Underground's the power.
And same at Amherst College. So actually, between Smith College and us, the demand is gonna go up probably about 4 to 5 megawatts. Because we're gonna be off the grid. But still burning, they're putting in auxiliary boilers because they know they're not gonna be able to keep the campus warm during the winter. They will, during the summer, they'll save, they won't be burning, but during the winter and the cold snaps, they'll be burning natural gas. And I know UMass, and I think at UMass, the rumors are true, they were thinking about doing the same thing, and they're backing away because they're not sure if it's really worth the cash that it would cost them to do. If the rumors are true, that
Yeah.
I'm no expert on geothermal. You need to talk to my colleagues in the
Okay.
geology side of the department, but
They have
what I've been hearing is you need the really deep geothermal, and that's not here yet.
At Amherst, the wells are 850 feet deep.
Right.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know there was,
Well, and the really deep geothermal is like miles.
Yes.
They're talking miles.
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
pushback from one of the neighbors up the side of the campus on UMass. Regarding geology.
Yep.
They wanted to move it somewhere else in the campus.
I don't know what the answer to this question, I'm not even sure how to translate. What effect, in a perfect world, what would pump storage look like? You know, I mean, how would-
I'm ambivalent about it, honestly. I mean, there are definitely people who think we should just shut it down totally. My own personal inclination is everything has real impacts, and if they exist today, they're probably better than creating something new somewhere else. I think the ISO markets actually work pretty well to have them be used when they should be used, and I think we should just let the ISO markets work fairly well and not be subsidizing them to operate more than that. And if they whine and complain that they're only working 8 or 12% of the time, say, yeah, good.
I'll get a job there, so it's nice place to work.
Who's at a conference this summer down the Cape on the National Seashore? This is the outer Cape from Orleans to P-Town. They talked about energy and doing storage with batteries. And what won the case for them to not have it was that the battery systems they use are zero recyclable. You can't, a car battery is 100% recyclable with like a Tesla battery or these batteries they want to use. They can't there's nothing they can reuse on them, but they do create a hazardous, and that's how the Cape won that.
Interesting. Never mind the environmental damage that occurs when you're on the lithium.
Right.
Right. Everything, as you said, there's a footprint to every source. And some people like solar and other people can't stand.
I don't know, when I was in high school, back in the ancient days of the late 1970s, people were talking about like energy reduction.
Right.
And there's still a possibility for, demand response instead of energy storage to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Shift in time.
We do that at college.
Yeah. So people are looking, but there's not as much corporate interest in it because people haven't figured out how to profit it, but you can aggregate demand response. You could use car batteries, and in an aggregate way as a kind of demand response system. Anyway, there's a lot of potential to use demand reduction and demand response in ways that would not have the footprint of these storage facilities. That is in the Clean Peak standard allows demand response, but this latest bill for procurement of storage does not allow demand response.
I've done a lot of work up at Northfield Mountain. Insane.
Do you know anything about the solar companies that are calling you all the time? They always seem to want to reduce your electric bill, but they don't want you to get it to go away. They don't want to give you enough solar to reduce your electric to zero. And why is this?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that.
Well,
Probably someone.
the national grid has a lot to do with that. The grid, in Massachusetts, it does. Give you an example, Mass Save. You look at your electrical bill, you have a service fee. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I haven't looked at my bill in a long time because it just keeps reading zero. But my wife, what used to be when I started, it was $14 a month is what I paid towards my service. My wife says it's up high now, but I didn't get in trouble. It's actually the grid came after me. They offered me a Mass Save where I had my house re-insulated for free. After 8 months, they came back with a bill saying, well, you haven't paid a service fee. I said, my service fee is paid for what my solar generates. And I actually, after a while, we won that, but it was kind of painful going through it. But the service fee that everybody's, I bet you, different. Wherever you go, it's different. But the national grid, They hate it when you put solar on. That's why now they only demand, you can't have more than 80%. Even,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah.
Well,
no,
there's
no,
an answer.
yeah.
You can get around that, because I went far above 80.
Yeah, I did too, but now, it's even the companies that install them, they're only gonna give you a certain amount of pop, panels. That's gonna keep you around 80%.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, you're still gonna have to, like with the escalator, the percentages they charge like every year or 2 years, you're back to where you started after 10 years.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.